Okay. Hi, Ross. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good.
Good. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. You are an author, award winning author of three books. Looks like you've had your work published in many different publications. Your latest book is called Rural Rebellion. Why don't you just tell us a little about it?
So this book, Rural Rebellion: How Nebraska Became a Republican Stronghold, is a part memoir, part journalism, part social science look at how rural areas in the middle of the country have veered to the right politically. And I'm telling it from a very personal point of view because I'm from a town of 300 people in Nebraska and I moved to New York City. So I'm kind of dissecting the urban rural divide by telling a specific story about a specific place and using it as a microcosm for the rest of the country.
Well, hasn't the Midwest in rural areas always been more conservative than the coasts in the United States?
It has, but not to this degree. And, in Nebraska, for instance, when I was born, we had Democratic U.S. senators, Democratic congressmen, Democratic governors. And now the idea of my state electing a Democrat is kind of ludicrous. And the Republicans we elect continue to go further to the right. So even over just a 30-year span, you've seen those areas become much more conservative, even though they were already leaning that way.
Okay, because it was kind of my understanding or my opinion, just from watching what's been going on for the last few years, particularly with the Trump phenomenon, that the Republican Party actually had been coming more towards the center. They seemed to be more inclusive, more, you know, accepting of things that they were not accepting of years ago. On the other hand, the Democrats have moved far to the left, much more to the left than they certainly were when I was growing up. So I don't know. You think that the Republicans have actually moved to the right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, any political science data shows that when they look at like ideology scores of Congress members, they are further to the right than they were 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll take your word for it. I don't, it just seemed to me, but all right.
I mean, I wouldn't say to say that they're moving further to the left. Um, I don't think like Mitt Romney and then Donald J. Trump are to the left of candidates who ran 10, 20 years before that. I mean, there's very few things that would be left on. I would say.
Well, then, would you agree that the Democrat Party has moved extremely to the left at this point?
I would say the Democrats have definitely moved to the left as well. Both parties have moved in opposite directions. They used to be more similar to each other. They had more moderate candidates, and now the idea of getting a moderate candidate from either party at the national level isn't very good. So that's part of the reason I believe Democrats have struggled in Nebraska. Is the party now is further to the left than where it was when Democrats got elected there. They used to elect more centrist Democrats. And if those same people tried to run today, I feel like Democrats would say they don't even belong to their party anymore.
Well, I think that's true. Do you think that's the case with Biden? Because he was always sort of a moderate in the past. Now I don't know if he knows what he is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say Biden has moved to the left throughout his career. I think he had to get elected to win the nomination for the Democratic Party, but I think he's still closer to the center than most of like the senators in his party are, for instance.
Why do you think that we have divided so much in this country? If what you say is true, that the Republicans have moved more to the right and the Democrats have moved far to the left, why are we going in that direction?
There's various reasons. I mean, for one, the gutting of campaign finance regulations has had an adverse effect, and you see a large amount of money coming from out of state sources now. In the past, campaigns were primarily funded by people who lived within that state where the representative lived. And that's no longer the case. So national organizations have gotten more involved, and they push an agenda that's good for their national organization that may not be good for that specific, municipality or state, and that's just further divided the country. And at that same time, the way we consume media has significantly changed, and you've had technological advancements combined with the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, and people now consume very left or very right-leaning sources, and the more just like factually driven sources like the Associated Press wire, for instance, don't have as much clout as they used to. It's more people reading like stuff they saw on Facebook and Twitter, which tends to be very ideological and not just, reporting the facts. So the campaign finance combined with the news sources and the political parties being more nationalized has just created a situation where the parties continue to split from one another. And now the choice on a ballot is pretty extreme. If you are going to elect a Republican or a Democrat, you're probably getting someone far in each direction. Not a whole lot of candidates running in the middle anymore.
How would you feel about the bulk of the American society, if there is such a thing? Are most of us moderates?
So yeah, when Gallup has data on this, and they show that moderates actually outnumber conservatives or liberals. They don't outnumber conservatives and liberals combined. But if you split up the American electorate into those three categories, and I obviously realize how they can bleed into each other, moderates actually have a higher percentage of the total population than either the liberal or the conservative categories do. But they don't have their own political party.
They don't have their own political party, and they also don't have too many choices of whom to vote for. Because I think that in the last election, moderates would have been fed up with both candidates.
Right now, when you think about how candidates are chosen, they are chosen in a primary by hyper-partisan people. So the way to expand the number of moderate candidates or to give moderate voters more say-so would have open primaries where people can vote on any candidate in a primary, no matter which party they are, and the top two would advance. And in that scenario, you could have Democrat versus Democrat or Republican versus Republican in the general election, but you probably won't see someone who's as hyper-partisan emerging victorious in the primary, because they wouldn't just be appealing to primary voters of their own party anymore. They'd have to appeal to the whole electorate.
Right. How do you feel about the Electoral College? There have been people calling to have it destroyed. How do you feel about that?
I mean, it is pretty antiquated, the Electoral College. When we think about the people who don't win the popular vote win in the presidency, I mean, that's tough to square away when you think about our democratic ideals. There should be some sort of reform. I don't know about straight up abolishing it, though, because if you straight up abolish it, then those smaller states are just going to really become flyover country for politicians. States like Nebraska aren't really going to receive any attention if you abolish it, because they're disproportionately represented right now. But we're in a situation now, though, where Wyoming and California have the same number of senators, and that's always been the same case. But the number of people who live in California has ballooned to 40 million people now, and Wyoming's lost population probably during that time. So it's not representative of a democracy. But I don't know what the full solution is, because it's kind of extreme if you abolish it. But the way it is right now, too, it's also kind of extreme letting letting Vermont and Wyoming have as much say-so as Texas and California do.
Well, in the Senate, yeah. In the House, it's a different story.
Yeah, but the Senate, has a lot of power and just 100 members, and they decide a lot of things if there's any legislation that's tangled up there, and the presidency too. These states, I mean, like Nebraska, just having 5 votes for it just gives us more power per person voting there than, just someone living in Texas, just, 2 states south of us. So I think something needs to change with the Electoral College. It is kind of antiquated, put in place during a much different time. But, moving to the popular vote, it'd be kind of opportunistic for Democrats to say that, though, because that favors them right now,
I think all of this is open for discussion. I mean, I think people need to have these kind of discussions. But I don't think we're going to ever have these discussions with the kind of political divide that we have in this country right now. And I don't know. I've never seen it like this. Even in the 1960s, when many people were protesting against the Vietnam War, and there was a huge gap that they used to call the generation gap in those days, there was more commonality between who was called the radicals in those days and who was called the establishment. I don't see that these days. I think this is a completely different issue.
More divided than I've ever seen in my lifetime, but I'm a young guy. I like to think if the less time we spend online, though, the better things look. Like if you focus on what people are actually doing in their communities instead of just what they're saying on Facebook or Twitter, it doesn't seem as bad.
Well, do you think that, I mean, that's a great topic for debate. Do you think that social media has directly or indirectly caused this division to where it is now, or pushed it further apart, made the divide wider?
I think it's contributed to it becoming wider, definitely. And people now, they can't even have their opinions challenged. Otherwise, they'll have to block and censor and get someone banned. It's not created a good situation. And those platforms, they tend to reward the most extreme statements. The most ridiculous statements on there are the ones that get the most likes and retweets and people with their eyeballs engaged to them, which means more time spent on those apps, which means more ads inserted and served to those people. And as long as they incentivize asinine extreme statements over neutral statements or just statements with factual substance, this is the situation they're going to have themselves in for years. They have to fix what they reward. I mean, there's been study by numerous advertising groups showing that just a neutral statement compared to one that takes a really hard side receives like no attention on Facebook. It's those really crazy ones that keep people glued, and we're amusing ourselves to death in an even more extreme way than we did with the advent of cable television.
Well, that's true, but cable television was only a one-way street.
Yeah, that's true.
Internet goes both ways, and you've given the power to the people, which is, on one sense, is a good idea in a democracy. We had this discussion last night on a different show I was on, and there's no gatekeeper for the people, but once you get to Twitter, they're being their own gatekeepers, and they're deciding who gets on and who doesn't get on, who gets banned, who gets canceled. And I think they have to make a decision if they're going to be representing the free press, which means everything can be on there, or not. Or people need to stop using it.
It's one thing to have people have the power to talk, but a lot of the really divisive stuff that happens on there isn't from normal people. It's anonymous accounts. It's bots. If Twitter made sure that the only people that could be on there were verified accounts where people's names were attached to it, I don't think it'd be quite as divisive, because when you have to have your name and association attached to a statement, it's a lot harder to attack someone for a baseless claim than it is when you are running a anonymous avatar and just libeling people.
Absolutely true. I couldn't agree more. Ross, we do have to wrap this up. We are out of time. Do you have a website that you want to give out, for a personal website or your book?
Oh, sure thing. You just go to rossbenish.com is my personal website, and the book is published by the University Press of Kansas. So if you want something that's an alternative to Amazon, you can go to their website.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.